There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning. Not the silence of peace, the silence of people who have run out of words and are just sitting with the weight of what might be coming. I know that silence well. I sat in it for 11 hours, denied my wife, Eleanor, had her second surgery. I sat in a plastic chair with a bad left leg that wobbled every time I shifted my weight, and I drank 4 cups of coffee that all tasted the same. And I watched the clock on the wall move with the specific cruelty of a clock that knows you are watching it. My son was there. Owen sat 3 seats down, his tie loosened, his jacket folded across his lap. He kept checking his phone, not for messages, just something to do with his hands. His father-in-law was not there. I remember noticing that. Reginald Ashworth, the man whose daughter my son had married 2 years prior, was not in that waiting room. He had sent a text. I know because Owen showed it to me at some point around midnight, his face carefully neutral in the way young men get when they are trying not to show you they are hurt. The text said he had an early tea time and that he was confident Eleanor would be fine. I didn't say anything. Owen didn't say anything. We both sat in that wobbling plastic chair silence and waited for the surgeon. Eleanor was fine. She came through. She always does. But I filed that tea time away in the back of my mind, the way you file things you are not ready to deal with yet. You don't throw them out. You just put them somewhere quiet and let them sit. Some things are worth waiting on. My name is Edmund Calloway. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a regional commercial lending firm called Calloway Bridge Capital out of a 2-room office above a dry cleaner on a street in Knoxville, Tennessee, that smelled permanently of steam and solvent. We are not a household name. We don't need to be. We provide bridge financing and working capital to mid-sized manufacturing and distribution companies, the kind that the big banks consider too small to care about and too large to fail quietly. My father drove a delivery truck for 38 years. He was up before 5 every morning his entire working life. He never complained about it. He liked the route, he told me once. He knew every loading dock and every back office receptionist by name, and he treated every one of them the same way he treated the plant owners. He said you can tell everything about a man by the way he talks to the person who signs his delivery receipt. I absorbed that more completely than I absorbed anything they taught me in business school. I met Reginald Ashworth for the first time at a dinner shortly after Owen announced his engagement to Ashworth's daughter, Priscilla. She's a good woman, warm and steady, and she clearly loves my son in the specific way that makes a father genuinely relieved. I had been looking forward to meeting her family. Reginald arrived at the restaurant in a way that communicated he was accustomed to arriving places. He was tall, silver-haired, and wore the kind of ease that comes from never having had to wonder whether you belong in a room. He'd inherited chairmanship of Ashworth Industrial Holdings from his father, who had built it from a mid-Atlantic manufacturing base into a diversified holding company with facilities in 6 states. Over dinner, he asked me what I did. I told him. He smiled the way people smile when they are already composing their next sentence and said something about community lending being the backbone of the American economy, which is what people say when they consider your work quaint. He spent the rest of the evening talking about a golf club membership he was pursuing and a senator he'd had lunch with the previous Thursday. He did not ask me a follow-up question for the remainder of the meal. I drove home that night and told Eleanor what I thought. She told me I was too quick to judge. She is usually right about that. I told her I hoped she was right this time and let it go. But the tea-time text sat there in the back of my mind, next to the dinner, filing itself neatly. In the spring of 2022, Ashworth Industrial Holdings came to us. Not to me directly. They came through my senior partner, a man named George Weston, who has been with Calloway Bridge for 19 years and treats a loan application the way a surgeon treats a pre-op checklist. He flagged the file on a Monday morning, set it on my desk with his reading glasses resting on top, which is his way of telling me he wants to talk before I open it. The numbers were not good. Ashworth Industrial had spent the better part of a decade making acquisitions that had nothing to do with manufacturing. Reginald had purchased a chain of auto detailing franchises in the Southeast, a specialty printing company in Ohio, and a logistics software startup that had since burned through its runway and was now a line item that existed only to confuse their balance sheet. The core business, two large-scale component manufacturing facilities in Pennsylvania and Virginia, with long-term contracts tied to a major appliance manufacturer, was genuinely strong. Cash flow positive, skilled workforce, solid client relationships. The peripheral acquisitions were bleeding them dry. They needed $38 million to restructure the acquisition debt and stabilize the core operation before their primary client relationship came up for renewal. If that client walked during a period of financial instability, the whole structure came down. I sat with the file for a long time. George knew what I was sitting with. He didn't say anything about the family connection. He just let me read. Finally, I told him I would stay involved, but I would do it quietly. I told him to represent Callaway Bridge in all direct communications with Ashworth's leadership team. I didn't give him a reason beyond telling him I had a personal relationship with the principals that made arm's-length participation appropriate. George is a professional. He didn't ask for more than that. What I didn't tell him was that I wanted to watch Reginald Ashworth operate when he thought the man across the table was just a lender and not the father of his son-in-law. I wanted to see the version of him that showed up when the stakes were high and no social performance was required. Over the next 4 months, George brought me nightly summaries the way a scout reports back from the field. The picture that emerged was consistent. Reginald was late to 3 of the first 5 meetings. Not traffic late. 35 minutes, no apology, adjustment of cufflinks, continuation of whatever sentence he had apparently been composing in his head on the way in. He referred to our underwriting analyst as the number crunchers. He rejected a standard governance reform condition on the grounds that the company had been in his family for 60 years and didn't need outside guidance on how to run itself. At one point, George told me Reginald had leaned back from the table during a session on their debt service schedule and said, "The people in this room build things. The people at your firm count things. I think we understand the difference." I wrote that one down in my notebook. I date everything. In the 8th week, something happened that I had not anticipated. My daughter-in-law called me. Priscilla called on a Tuesday evening while I was on my back porch watching the light change over the ridge behind our house. She said she needed to talk to me, and she needed it to stay between us for now. Her voice had the particular, careful steadiness of a woman who has rehearsed what she is about to say several times. She told me her father had asked her to help him. He had told her that our firm was being difficult, that we were looking for reasons to deny the financing because we didn't think Ashworth Industrial was worth the trouble. He told her that if she could pass along any information from Owen about how our internal review was progressing, it would help him prepare better responses to our conditions. He framed it as leveling the playing field. She had not passed anything along. She had come to me instead. I sat on that porch for a long time after we hung up. I thought about Owen. He didn't know any of this was happening. He was sitting somewhere in his own house that evening, probably watching baseball, trusting that the 2 families around him were operating in good faith. He had married this woman because he loved her, and because he believed her family was something solid to build a life alongside. I thought about what it costs a person to call their father-in-law and tell him that her own father had asked her to betray him. I knew that call had not been easy. I told Priscilla I was grateful she had told me, and I asked her to do one thing. I asked her not to tell Reginald she had spoken to me and not to pass any information. If he asked again, I told her to tell him she had tried, but Owen didn't discuss work at home. Let him believe the channel was just closed, not that she had turned it. She agreed. There was a long exhale on the line that told me she had been carrying this for at least a week. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a while longer. Then I called George. I told him nothing about Priscilla. I told him to proceed normally, to make no changes to the timeline, and that I needed him to ensure our standard conduct clause was written into the final commitment letter exactly as drafted, not softened, not adjusted for the sensitivity of the deal, verbatim. He said Reginald's lawyers had already flagged it as unusual. I told him it wasn't unusual. It was the cost of entry. The formal closing event was scheduled for a Thursday morning at Ashworth Industrial's regional headquarters in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It was designed to be a significant occasion. Reginald had arranged for their full board to attend along with their senior management team, several long-term clients, and a handful of local business media contacts. He intended to present the refinancing as a strategic growth partnership, a signal of confidence in the company's future, rather than a rescue from a slow-motion financial collapse. The announcement was also going to be webcast to employees at both manufacturing facilities. Priscilla told me this during a brief call the week before. She said her father had been preparing his remarks for days. He was planning to frame the whole event as his vision coming to fruition. I booked a flight to Lancaster. I didn't tell George. I didn't tell Reginald's team. I let my name stay off every document that had crossed Ashworth's desk for the previous 4 months. To their leadership team, I was the managing partner of the lending firm, a title that carries weight but no face attached to it. I told Priscilla I would be in the room. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "I thought you might be." The morning of the event was overcast, the kind of flat gray November sky that turns everything the same color. I took a car from the hotel, arrived at the building at 8:45, and walked in through the main lobby carrying a plain manila envelope that my assistant had prepared according to my exact instructions the night before. The facility was one of those regional headquarters buildings from the 1980s that had been updated enough to feel current, but still had the bones of an era when American manufacturing believed it would last forever. There was a broad reception desk staffed by a woman who had clearly been managing that particular lobby for a long time, and had seen more difficult mornings than this one. I gave her my name. She confirmed it without any particular expression and called upstairs. The escort who came down was a young man in a suit that was clearly new. He introduced himself as the Director of Investor Relations. He talked about the weather on the way up in the elevator. I let him. When the boardroom doors opened, the room was already arranged for the occasion. Long table, board members along the sides, a presentation screen at the far end already showing an Ashworth Industrial logo slide, camera equipment in 2 corners, the red tally lights blinking steadily, the webcast already running. Reginald was at the head of the table. He was in his element in the specific way of men who have spent their whole lives being the largest presence in whatever room they occupy. He was speaking to a board member on his left, his hands moving in that practiced executive gesture that signals confidence to the people watching. He was dressed for the occasion. He looked like a man who had already won. Owen was at the table. My son was sitting toward the middle, a presentation folder in front of him, his expression composed. He had not known I was coming. He glanced up when the doors opened, registered the newcomer with a polite sweep of his eyes, and went back to his notes. He didn't recognize me immediately because the entrance was backlit, and he wasn't expecting me. I walked past the credenza at the side of the room where a junior staffer gestured that I could leave my materials. I kept walking. I found a chair at the corner of the table, the kind of chair that doesn't have a nameplate in front of it because it belongs to whoever needs an extra seat, and I sat down. I placed the manila envelope on the table in front of me, aligned with the edge. That was when Owen looked up again. I watched him go through it in real time. The recognition, the confusion, the deliberate effort to arrange his face into something neutral. His knuckles went white on the folder. I gave him the smallest nod I could. It wasn't a reassurance. It was just an acknowledgement. I'm here. I know what I'm doing. Reginald noticed the shift in the room before he identified its source. He looked up from his conversation, scanned the table, and found me. He took me in the way men like him take in people they consider to be below the threshold of concern. A glance, a categorization, a dismissal. "You can leave those on the side table," he said, his voice carrying the practiced ease of a man used to giving minor corrections to minor staff. He gestured at my envelope without looking at it. "Someone will collect them before we go live." I didn't respond. I didn't move. I introduced myself to the gentleman sitting to my right, a man I recognized as the incoming operations director. I offered my hand. "Edmund," I said. He shook it, a professional transaction, and introduced himself. His name was Russell Hale, I would learn later. He had come aboard 3 months prior from a defense contractor and had not yet formed the particular institutional loyalty that made other people in the room reluctant to look directly at what was happening. He saw a man named Edmund. He nodded and turned back to his papers. The handshake rippled. Reginald had stopped his side conversation. He was looking at me with the expression of a man who has noticed a protocol breach and is deciding how forcefully to correct it. He set down his coffee cup. There was a specific sound to it, the deliberate placement of porcelain on a hard surface. "I don't know who arranged your access to this room," Reginald said, his voice carrying a different register now, the one that has spent decades expecting to end conversations. "But I make a point of not mixing with operational support staff during executive sessions. You'll want to move to the back." The silence that followed was of a particular quality. I didn't stand up. I looked at Reginald Ashworth across that table with the same patience I have applied to every negotiation that mattered in 31 years, and I held his gaze for 4 seconds without speaking, long enough for the room to understand that the silence was a choice. Then I folded my hands on top of the envelope. "Mr. Ashworth," I said, my voice unhurried, "before this presentation begins, there's something this room needs to understand." He opened his mouth. I spoke first. "My name is Edmund Calloway. I am the founder and managing partner of Calloway Bridge Capital. I am the person whose signature is required to release the $38 million that this event was convened to announce. I've been sitting 4 months of due diligence and listening to your team describe my analysts as number crunchers, and I have been in this chair for 11 minutes listening to you direct me toward the side table." The room did not make a sound. I want to make sure that every person in this room and everyone watching the webcast feed understands who is in it before we proceed. Reginald's face moved through several expressions in rapid succession, ending at something between calculation and fury. His jaw tightened. The board member to his left suddenly found his printed materials deeply interesting. Russell Hale, the operations director, set down his pen with the quiet precision of a man stepping away from something explosive. Owen had not moved. His folder was open in front of him, but he was not looking at it. He was looking at me. His face had gone from composed to something raw, the specific expression of a man realizing a conversation he was never given the context for has been happening around him for months. Reginald recovered. He is, whatever else he is, a man who has spent 70 years projecting authority, and he was not going to give up that habit quickly. "Edmund," he said, using my first name with a deliberate familiarity that was meant to re-establish his dominance. "We have a relationship here that goes beyond the table. Owen is like a son to me. Our families are joined. I think this is a moment for some perspective, not a performance." He was doing what I had expected him to do. He was using the family connection as a constraint, a leash he believed I would not pull too hard for fear of what the pulling might do to my son's marriage. I looked at him steadily. "The family relationship is exactly why I am going to be precise," I said. I stood up. I walked to the head of the table, the camera-facing end, and I placed the manila envelope directly in front of Reginald's coffee cup. "That envelope contains a formal notice of material breach under Section 12 of our commitment agreement," I said. "Specifically the conduct integrity provision. The breach is documented on the webcast footage from the last 12 minutes. I'd encourage the board to review the language before we go any further." I did not raise my voice. I did not perform. I walked back to my corner chair and sat down, and I let the room process what had just landed in it. Martin, the CFO, had already opened his laptop. Across the table I watched 2 board members reaching for their copies of the agreement, their fingers moving quickly. The camera lights kept blinking. Reginald stared at the envelope as if expecting it to do something different than what it had already done. Then he looked at me again, and for the first time since I had walked into that room, he was genuinely looking. Not scanning for a category, not measuring for a hierarchy, looking. I think that was the first moment he understood that the 4 months of due diligence he had spent managing a faceless lending firm had been conducted under the observation of the man who had watched him send a tea-time text while his daughter-in-law was in surgery. He started to say something about legal counsel and contractual language and the standard interpretation of boilerplate provisions. The CFO cleared his throat. "Mr. Ashworth," the CFO said, his voice flat and deliberate, "the provision isn't boilerplate. It was inserted as a named, non-negotiable condition. Our legal team flagged it twice during review. You waived both reviews." A board member near the window, a woman who had said nothing since I had entered the room, looked up from her copy of the agreement and said quietly, "The webcast has been live since 9. The remarks were made on camera. The documentation is self-generating. Reginald's hand was resting on the table. I watched it go still. He looked at Owen. My son was sitting 3 seats away. He looked back at his father-in-law with an expression I recognized. It was the same expression Eleanor wore in the recovery room after her surgery, the particular face of a person who has finally stopped being surprised and is simply deciding what to do next. It was not anger. It was a clear-eyed, costly understanding. Owen did not speak. He did not reach for his phone. He did not offer a defense or a negotiation. He looked at Reginald for a long moment, and then he looked at me. I gave him the same small nod I had given him at the beginning. Different meaning this time. "Do something," Reginald said to him, his voice lower now, stripped of the baritone performance. It was the voice of a man running out of tools. "Call your father. Tell him this is a misunderstanding. This is not how we resolve things between families." Owen straightened his jacket. He looked at his father-in-law one more time, and then he said something that settled over that room the way a stone settles into still water. "He is my father," Owen said, "and he didn't misunderstand anything. I needed to misunderstand anything. I needed to make 2 calls. I excused myself and walked out into the hallway, the boardroom doors closing behind me with a soft, pneumatic sound that felt like punctuation. The hallway was empty. There was a row of framed photographs along one wall, the history of Ashworth Industrial in black and white and color, a company that had been built by people who worked hard and was currently being steered by a man who had confused inheriting it with earning it. I called George first. "Execute the withdrawal notice," I told him. "Full amount, cite the conduct provision, make the documentation package reference the webcast footage with timestamps. I want it in their general counsel's inbox within the hour." George didn't hesitate. He had been watching the live feed from our office in Knoxville. He said, "It's already drafted. I'll send it now." Then I called Priscilla. She picked up on the second ring. She knew. She had been watching the webcast on her laptop at home, and she had seen the whole thing unfold in real time. "Dad," she said, not my name, not Edmund. She had never called me that before. She cleared her throat. "Is Owen okay?" "He held himself well," I said. "I want you to know that what you told me 2 weeks ago is part of why this happened the way it did. You did the right thing." There was a long pause. "He asked me again last week," she said. "I told him Owen didn't discuss work at home, like you said." "I know. That's what I thought. What happens now?" "Now the hard part," I told her honestly. "But not today. Today is already done." When I came back into the boardroom, the CFO had his laptop open on the table and the main presentation screen had been replaced with a different display, a document chain that George had apparently begun forwarding to the CFO's inbox, a supplementary package that included a specific internal communication I had chosen to include at the last moment. It was an email, retrieved from Ashworth Industrial's own corporate server, where Reginald had been conducting personal correspondence the way executives sometimes do when they believe their company's infrastructure is an extension of their personal property. The email was dated 8 months prior. It was addressed to Reginald's personal assistant and referenced a background report on Callaway Bridge Capital and, specifically, on me. It confirmed that Edmund Callaway was Owen's father. It referred to the family relationship as leverage. The CFO read it aloud. Reginald did not move. Owen was looking at the screen. I watched my son read those words, watched the date register, understand what the timeline meant. He had married Priscilla before this email was written. He had built 2 years of a life on what he believed was genuine family. He stood up. He didn't speak to Reginald. He didn't speak to the board. He walked to the boardroom doors and left. The same quiet deliberateness I had watched him carry since he was a boy, learning that some exits are more powerful than any entrance. The room that remained was a quieter and more diminished version of the one I had walked into an hour earlier. The board called for a formal suspension motion before noon. The vote was 5-2. The withdrawal notice was logged in the system at 11:47. By the time I was in a car headed back to the airport, Ashworth Industrial stock had begun to reflect what the morning had cost them. I sat in the airport for 2 hours waiting for my flight. Owen texted me from Lancaster. He said he was driving back to Knoxville and would call when he got in. He said 3 words at the end of the message that I have read several times since. "Thank you, Dad." Priscilla called me that evening. She was in the house she and Owen shared, and she had spent the afternoon reading through documents she had found on her father's home computer, a server he had stopped locking after she proved herself useful to him. She had found more than she expected. What she found was a pattern. Reginald had used similar approaches with 2 previous financing partners over the previous 6 years. In both cases, an insider connection had been identified and cultivated. In both cases, the cultivation stopped the moment the capital was secured. One of those insiders was a former friend of Reginald's own, a man who had trusted him completely. She brought those documents to me in a second folder, setting them on the kitchen table of our Knoxville house 3 days later with the same deliberateness I had used when I placed the manila envelope in front of her father. The legal situation resolved faster than I expected. Reginald filed a conflict of interest challenge within a week, claiming that my family connection to Owen invalidated the withdrawal. His lawyers were good, but the emails on Pinnacle's own corporate server, including the ones that showed the conflict of interest argument being pre-planned as a contingency 2 months before the closing event, gave us what we needed for a counter-response that his counsel read on a Thursday morning and apparently advised him to walk away from by Thursday afternoon. The challenge was withdrawn on a Friday. Reginald's resignation from the chairmanship was filed with the board on the following Monday. There was a business journalist who reached me about a week later. She asked whether the public nature of the confrontation had been necessary given the family involvement. I thought about that for a moment before I answered. There are $38 million in 2 manufacturing facilities and about 900 jobs tied to the outcome of what happened in that room, I said. The family relationship didn't change the math. It just meant I had to be more careful about the evidence. She asked if it had been personal. I looked out the window of my office. The ridge behind our house was visible on clear days from here, a long blue line against the Tennessee sky. My father drove a delivery truck his entire life, I said. Every morning, same route, same loading docks, same back offices. He knew every person on that route by name, from the plant managers to the dock workers. He treated all of them exactly the same. He told me once that you can tell everything about a man by how he talks to the person who has to listen to him. I paused. Reginald Ashworth talked to people who had to listen to him his entire career. And every single person in that room on Thursday had to listen to him, until they didn't. She thanked me and ended the call. I set the phone down. Owen came over for dinner that Sunday, he and Priscilla together, the first time since Lancaster. Eleanor made her pot roast, the one that takes 4 hours and fills the house with a smell that means something specific to our family, something that has nothing to do with boardrooms or balance sheets. We ate at the kitchen table. We talked about other things. Owen asked about a neighbor's fence project and whether I had finally gotten around to replacing the gutters on the back of the house, and I told him I had not. Priscilla asked Eleanor about her physical therapy and listened carefully to the answer. After dinner, Owen and I sat on the back porch with coffee. The ridge was dark. The air had the particular bite of late November in the Tennessee hills. He said he had been thinking about what his grandfather used to say. My father, the delivery truck driver. He used to say that a man's word was the only asset that didn't depreciate, Owen said. He did say that, I said. Owen turned his coffee cup in both hands. I've been thinking about what it cost you to wait. 4 months. Watching all of it. It cost you to wait. 4 months. Watching all of it. It cost something, I admitted. You could have told me. I know, why didn't you? I looked out at the dark ridge and thought about how to say it accurately. Because if I had told you what I suspected, you would have been living in the middle of it for 4 months, trying to manage 2 loyalties simultaneously. That's not something I was willing to put you through on a suspicion. You needed to see the evidence the way it actually was, not filtered through me. Owen was quiet. Priscilla called me, I said. 2 weeks before Lancaster. She came to me herself. That mattered. He nodded slowly. He already knew this part. Priscilla had told him, the way she tells him most things, directly and without editing. After a while, Owen set down his coffee cup and extended his hand. It wasn't a casual gesture. It was the specific, deliberate handshake of a man who understands what a handshake means when it is offered intentionally, between two people who know exactly what they are confirming. I took it. His grip was firm and unhesitating. "Your grandfather would have liked you," I said. He smiled at that. It was the particular smile of a man who has had a hard month and is sitting on a porch with someone he trusts, and it is enough. We sat out there until the cold drove us back inside. There are things I could not have anticipated when this started. I could not have anticipated Priscilla. I could not have anticipated the steadiness she showed in a situation that offered every reason to look the other way. I could not have anticipated the way Owen walked out of that boardroom without a word, the same way my father used to exit rooms that no longer deserved his participation. You think you are planning for the variables you can see. You build your systems, you write your clauses, you position your pieces with care. And then the variable you didn't plan for turns out to be the one that matters most. It was a 26-year-old woman who called her father-in-law on a Tuesday evening and told him the truth when she had every reason not to. Some things are worth waiting on, and some things you discover were already waiting for you. I have had a long time to sit with what happened in that boardroom in Lancaster, long enough to stop replaying the moment itself and start thinking about what the whole sequence actually cost and what it was worth. The thing that stays with me most isn't Reginald's face when I told him who I was. It's the tea time text. That's the detail I keep returning to. Eleanor in surgery at 2 in the morning, and the man who would become her son's father-in-law had an early tea time. He sent a text. He was confident she'd be fine. That tells you everything. Not the arrogance in the boardroom, not the email about leverage, not the attempt to turn his daughter into an instrument. All of those were just the same thing wearing different clothes. The tea time was the original. The rest was just the bill coming due. I spent 4 months watching Reginald Ashworth operate, and I want to be honest about something. Patience is not the same as virtue. I waited because I needed the evidence to be complete, not because I was above the situation. There were nights during those months when I was angry in ways that didn't feel measured or strategic at all. I was just a father, watching a man treat people like furniture, including my son, and having to keep that out of my voice on conference calls. What I learned is that people who treat others as tools eventually run out of the things that tools are supposed to provide. Reginald spent decades surrounding himself with people who existed to serve his momentum, his board members, his employees, his own daughter. When the moment came that he genuinely needed someone in that room to choose him over the truth, there was no one left who would. Not because they were disloyal, because loyalty had never been offered to them in the first place. You cannot withdraw from an account you never deposited into. Owen held himself with a dignity in that room that I did not teach him. I mean that sincerely. I gave him the framework, the stories about his grandfather, the examples of how to conduct yourself when the pressure is real. But the man who sat at that table and didn't flinch, who walked out without a word when words would only have reduced what the silence already said. That was Owen. That was what he had built himself into over 32 years of his own choices. Priscilla called her father-in-law on a Tuesday evening and told him the truth when every incentive available to her said to stay quiet. She had grown up in Reginald's house. She knew exactly what his disapproval cost. She called anyway. That is what genuine moral courage looks like, and it rarely arrives with fanfare. It arrives as a phone call on a Tuesday, when someone decides that being honest is worth more than being comfortable. I think about what I would tell a younger version of myself, someone just starting out with a folding table and a vision, and a father's example pressing against the back of his mind. I would say this: build your systems, write your clauses, do your due diligence, but the most important thing you will ever put into a room is the same thing you walk in with, which is the complete alignment between who you are when people are watching and who you are when they aren't. Reginald Ashworth was not undone by me. He was undone by the accumulated weight of every person he had treated as a means to an end. Every meeting he was 40 minutes late to without an apology. Every analyst he dismissed as a number cruncher. Every family dinner where he made someone feel like furniture. The reckoning wasn't the boardroom. The boardroom was just where the invoice was finally presented. My father drove that truck for 38 years. He knew every name on his route. He never asked what a person's title was before deciding how to speak to them. He is the reason I still know the names of every receptionist, every dock manager, every junior analyst in my firm. Character isn't what you perform when the cameras are on. It's what you've already decided before you walk into the room.